So I might need to take another break to let them out, but we'll see.
My dogs
It's
are so naughty too. Like when I'm off Zoom, he doesn't care about me, but then when I'm on, especially my EU project partner check-ins, he's like ripping apart boxes, acting like a security. Yeah.
and I
But
think it's because they hear us. And then I think my dogs have trained me that if they come to me while I'm talking, I'm gonna let them out because I'm not gonna want them playing behind me because it's really hard to. So they tend to do that more. Okay. All right. So we talked about the ADA and individual accommodations. The one thing that I do just to try to feel a little bit better about like the first class and Delta is I oftentimes will buy my ticket right away so that it's the cheapest fare I can find. And then also because I also have things about the size of the plane. So, and then I won't feel as bad. And because I fly, you know, um, exclusively pretty much Delta, if something happens and the conference changes or whatever, I get a credit and I'm gonna use it again. So anyway, okay. So now is okay. So again, you just see the one slide, right? Okay, so these are some of the common costs associated with some of the, most common accommodations. So, and we have a lot more on this, um, but we can share with people who are trying to budget ahead of time. We typically just ask people to kind of reach out to us and ask for TA, and we'll walk them through the things that they want to think about for their budget. And then, so the key is then identifying the need for accommodations. So I can apply this in two ways. One, for a direct service program, and two, for your training and TA work. So you can ask about accommodations like right up front, and you can keep asking. So whenever you do a registration for webinar, training, anything, you can ask folks about accommodations to find out, right? And you do that already. And then if you start with the floor, you provide certain things, whether people are there or not, like ASL interpreting or live transcription. And then too, especially with webinars, because you're going to post those on your website afterwards or give people access to them afterwards, then they'll be accessible no matter who accesses them, at least except for spoken language. So some of the ways that if you're in person and someone is coming to a program for services, and this is also true for people like in the criminal legal system, any aspects where people are working, there's just simple ways to ask. Is there something I can do to make this process easier for you? What do you need for me? What do you need for me to know as we proceed? So remember Keisha, in that video, Keisha was sexually assaulted and she tried to report. She had a really bad officer that she was meeting with, because he clearly did not believe her, and didn't want to work with her. So he just gave her a form to fill out. And even though she was there with her parents, they couldn't figure out how to fill out the form and they didn't have disabilities. And then when they asked the officer to questions, he started giving her he did kind of rapid fire questions. And really stressed her out. And so then she started stuttering and then had more and more difficulty answering any of his questions. And so then they left. So what you want to, that's like the worst case scenario. I feel he said some kind of derogatory stuff to her and then they left. And so this is, so being able to ask these kind of questions, like, what do you need for me to know as we proceed? You know, it might be hard for someone to say, I don't always understand what I'm reading. Like that's something that happens to me when I experience a lot of stress. It's very hard for me to understand what I'm reading, even though normally I'm good at reading. Like, you know, I became a lawyer. You do have to read to become a lawyer and understand what you're reading. So, so it's hard for people to understand that. Even people that know trauma, it's still hard for them to understand that some of their documentation might be hard to understand, even if someone can understand things generally. And then what is the best way for me to communicate these points for you to you? Though all these things encourage people to ask for support. What are your preferences and how to receive complicated information? And if you do this, or if people that you're training or providing technical assistance do this, it'll be really powerful for people because no one ever asks them. And then they feel weird that they need something different. So I want to show you this little video that we created about how to have a conversation with someone and ask for accommodations while you're working with them on the reason they came in, which is a sexual assault. So.
Providing accessible services can help you to better support more victims and help them heal. There are many things you can do to make your services more accessible to every survivor, such as communicating in plain language and offering flexible appointment times and locations. However, some people have unique needs that can only be met by providing them with an accommodation. Set the stage. Let people know what you offer. Ask and listen. Discuss needs and strategize options with the victim. Provide accommodations as needed. And then, check in and make changes. You may be wondering, why is it so important to ask every victim I come in contact with if they need accommodations? 1 in 5 people in the US has a disability. You can't assume that someone does or doesn't have a disability. Some disabilities are not obvious. Some people with disabilities don't need accommodations. But those who do may not be able to receive your services without them. Many service providers are open to asking everyone about accommodations, but don't know how and are worried about saying the wrong thing. So we've created this video to demonstrate how to ask people if they need accommodations. As you'll notice, asking can become a natural part of your conversations with survivors. Before you ask about access needs, you will want to set the stage.
How you doing, Keith?
I'm okay.
I know it can be overwhelming to come to a rape crisis center for the first time. Let me tell you what we do here at the center. Then I want to hear about you. What brought you here? What support you're needing today? And what might you need in the future? I'll also need you to fill out a little paperwork. Just let me know if you have any questions. Before we get started, is there anything I can do to make you feel more comfortable?
No, thank you. I'm okay.
Well, if you think of anything while we're talking, just let me know. What brings you in today?
Well, what brings me in today is I had an incident that I need to talk about.
People need to understand what is involved in your interactions to determine if they need an accommodation. They also might want to know why you're asking. In the next scene, you will notice that Alex talks with Keith about what to expect from the Rape Crisis Center. Once Keith knows more about what is involved, he can determine if he needs an accommodation.
Thank you for sharing your experience with me. I know it's taken you a lot of courage to come in today. It sounds like you're interested in one of our support groups. Our support groups are held once a week in our office where you would come in and listen and share what you feel comfortable. There are usually 5 to 10 people in the group each week. Are there any supports you need to be able to attend group?
Will the room be wheelchair accessible?
Yes, our group is held on an accessible room on the first floor. I'll make sure to tell the facilitator to set up the room so that there's space for you and others to get around. If you'd like to come a few minutes before the session, we can make sure the room is set up in a way that works for you.
Okay, I'd like to do that because sometimes they say the room is accessible, wheelchair accessible, and it's not.
So, how did Alex find out if Keith needed an accommodation? Alex asked about accommodations for today's meeting and for future meetings. He started by asking Keith if there's anything he needed to feel comfortable before they started talking. During their meeting, Keith said he wanted to participate in a support group. Alex explained what would be involved in attending a support group and asked if he needed any supports. Alex assured Keith that the room would be accessible and that he could arrive early to check out the space if he wanted.
Before you go, I'll need you to fill out a little paperwork. Just 2 sheets of paper with questions about basic demographic information that we need for our grant funding. I can email them to you and you can fill them out on your phone, or I can give you the forms and you can bring them back later, if that feels safe to you. Do you need any support filling out the forms?
If you could go over it with me and give me a hand filling it out, that'd be great.
Sounds good.
Finally, as they were about to start filling out paperwork, Alex asked Keith if he needed any assistance and gave a few examples of different supports he could offer. In many ways, Alex is using basic advocacy skills, setting expectations, checking in with Keith, making room for questions, and giving Keith the space he needs. To review, set the stage. Let people know what you offer. Ask and listen. Discuss needs and strategize options with the victim. Provide accommodations as needed. And then, check in and make changes. Asking about accommodations is less about saying the right thing. It is more about having a conversation and understanding that people have unique needs. These videos are part of a toolkit that includes more information on asking about and providing accommodations. This video was created by the National Resource Center for Reaching.
I like this video because it shows people how to do it. And I think even though it's pretty easy, people get worried about, how do I ask? I don't want to offend people. And so that's Keith, who was in the other video. We do a lot of work with Keith, and just as an aside, Keith is an Emmy and Grammy winning performer. Yeah, right. It's he also just got a Ford Foundation grant to do work with I think Black and maybe Black and brown kids with disabilities in the South, in particular in Alabama. So he's creating, and it's very, very cool. He's creating mentors and he's creating support around sports, but not your traditional sports, like gaming and other types of technological sports. And with the idea that kids are going to learn how to code, and then just matching people up with mentors so that other people with disabilities, not necessarily the same disabilities, but other people with disabilities, with the idea that for them to see that there is possibility in their lives, even though you have a disability, and then helping people access certain types of training through play. So he's cool.
So back to what you kind of said about this idea that, like some of this is it's not life shattering or like groundbreaking, right?
Super easy.
Ask people, right? Like
Ask people.
But right?
Go
But so
ahead.
people get like so caught in this idea of like, you know, you don't want to offend somebody, you don't want to re-traumatize, you don't want, or you also see it with like complex trauma, right?
Right.
And so it's just really, and that's not to say that, you know, everyone can serve or work with everybody else, right? You know, there's
Right.
certain people you're going to vibe with, certain people, all that kind of stuff. But
Right.
I don't know, it's just nice to hear this idea that like, I think we sometimes like accessibility in all the ways, it should just be present and be possible, I guess. And so,
Exactly. It's really connecting and not being afraid to ask. Like he didn't, you know, there's also appropriate asking and then weird asking. But so we have like this video, we have it for like it showed, we have an example if you're a lawyer or prosecutor and an example if you're a police officer. We also created this video for this law enforcement training of from a body cam video of an officer responding to someone who he thought was going to be a really easy, it was a runaway case, who he thought was going to be really easy and turned out to be someone who had escaped their home from abuse. And because of the level of abuse, that she had a developmental disability, and how then the officer adapted to her, and it was just natural. So we use that for the beginning of a training with law enforcement so they could see how easy it is and see somebody doing it, and then we build on that. It just, I think people just are afraid, so that gets in their way. So that's the extent to which like the presentation on accommodations. So I kind of wanted to check and see. So a couple things that I'm kind of picking up from our discussion is to be able to help people think about accessibility in their like materials, in their physical, but not just physical locations. So making sure that we're kind of addressing that. And we do have a whole online course on that, but I think doing that, so we do that, we were doing that in person and then stopped doing that, and now we're going to be doing that in person again. And OVW requires people to attend that who have grants. But then, and then there's the access reviews that we talked about. So the key, so when I went to two programs, two culturally specific programs, the one in DC that is Safe Sisters Circle, which is a Black program for a Black community. And they asked for an access review. Then I went to Monsoon, who asked me to come and see their 3 locations, but did not ask for an access review. So because they didn't ask for an access review, I spent a day at each location. I spent a day and a half in Des Moines, like a day learning about what they do, and then a half a day kind of doing a training. And what I did instead, because I didn't ask for an access review, I didn't want to push one on them, but I made, because they showed me around, I let them know a couple things. Like they had people coming in, they had 2 doors, and they had people coming in one door and not this other door. They put plants and stuff in front of it, so they weren't using that door. But the door that they had people coming through was narrow, and then it had a step before you get in, and they teach classes to elders. So I just kind of chatted with them, like, did they have elders that had difficulty coming in that way? And then we talked about how they could use that door instead and do, because what they do is they have this door that opens up into this kind of meeting space. So we just kind of chatted about that. So I didn't want to like make it look like I was criticizing what they were doing, but just kind of giving them an alternative way to make it a little more accessible. And then they had boxes because they ran out of space in their filing area, and they were in the hallways, and that those hallways weren't really accessible. So I just asked, like, who comes down into these offices? Do they have survivors come in or not? And then just was, because they have office space where those boxes are, but they have open space in the rest. So we were kind of trying to figure out how they can make it accessible. Like they could meet people in that open space, but it won't be private. So I kind of did that as a way of just kind of helping them think about things, but I did not do an access review. Like I didn't measure stuff, and that felt really important because they didn't ask for one and I offered one. So that's kind of how I've approached programs. And I was just kind of thinking, like, is there anything that I do or that you think we should make sure to do or not do if we were working with some of the tribal sexual assault programs?
I think if you're looking at like ones that are specific within tribes, like not like urban Indian programs, but specific tribal programs. So like there's one thing when you're doing like the physical site where you're looking at their space, but I think like the complication is that it's not like it's a standalone where you're able to make all the changes on your own, right? Like there's a process for how that happens, and it's oftentimes a lot more involved, and there's more people that are involved in the approval process or making those changes, and so I think that's where I think some of the biggest challenges are, is that they don't always have the ability to just go, oh, we'll just fix that.
Right. So then for them, it would be kind of consistent with like finding alternative ways to do their work, like at a different location, doing an intake. Okay. So kind of like going to Safe Sister Circle and realizing that they're in this house that's old house up a hill. Okay, cool.
Yeah. I mean, because it's certainly like making those suggestions, like if you're able to, but also then like thinking through, if they're not, here's some alternatives, you know?
Right. Cool. Okay. That's helpful. I didn't realize, because they have to go through the bureaucracy of the tribe, right? And then the urban Indian programs though don't.
I'd say for most of the part, I would say they aren't specifically necessarily like like they're not, you know, placed under like the governmental, like behavioral health, for example, or things like that. A lot of them do have their own, you know, standalone nonprofit kind of status. And so I'd say that there can be more flexibility, but it's also like with many places. I mean, even when you're talking about, you know, like them converting old hotels into like these like Marriott's, right? And how so many of those older buildings get like blanketed in basically for like exemptions. And thinking about that as well. So I'm trying to think if there's anything like unique in those situations, but I feel that there's less tribal government bureaucracy in those places, but.
Cool. Okay, that's helpful. And then, is there an issue with law enforcement, prosecution, other criminal legal processes? Like, do you lean away from that, or is it still kind of leaning into that? You know, let Nicole answer that.
Can you ask that again? Sorry.
Yes.
The question was,
No.
I have to jump on another call in a minute, and she was calling me and it got really loud.
No worries.
Like, stop calling me, just send me the link.
No, it's so our tribal, so a lot of culturally specific programs are not leaning into criminal legal system response. And I was wondering if tribal programs were still leaning or not, or does it vary?
100%. They're like very much leaning into the criminal justice response. And so and that's not a judgment, but I think that like we have worked so hard and so long to get a criminal justice
Yeah.
response, and on criminal justice reform, like the reforms around tribal sovereignty and all of the things that
Yeah.
To separate from that, I think is a little more involved. So people are still very invested. And then, if you look at the funding streams that go towards tribes and tribal programs, it is very criminal justice based.
Yeah.
Um,
Like
and
Bureau of Justice Assistance and yeah.
Yep. So, so they're very much still invested in
Okay.
the criminal justice response. I think it's different for programs, tribal programs like urban Indian programs. I think they are less invested in the criminal justice response. And
Okay.
but as far as our reservation programs, still very much so.
Okay. And we do that with mainstream programs. I just wanted to make sure we weren't leaning the wrong way with tribal programs.
Mhm.
So, and then of course I've worked with systems forever. So that's usually me trying to figure out how we can get law enforcement to do things more accessibly and prosecutors to do things more accessibly.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Anything else that you think I should know?
I mean, I think, it just really depends, right? Because tribal programs are so different from one to another. There's multiple forms of like, different challenges, jurisdiction. Some are very rural, some are not rural.
Yeah.
And so, I think the accessibility piece, so many people, like when you were like saying how people say, well, we just don't have anybody. I think you will hear a lot of that in tribal communities. People will just say, well, we just don't have, that's just not a
Yeah.
need of ours. And it's not true, right? Because it's like, if you build the services, people will come. But if people know that if there's a sense that you don't have the services, they're not coming.
Yeah, that's it.
So, so I think people still very much feel like it's not an issue.
Okay.
But even if we talk about it in terms of like what you said last week about like, hopefully all of us get to an age where we have a disability, like
Right.
that was really profound for me in thinking about aging and how, how our bodies change. And many people end up with a disability, even if it's just like having to wear glasses now, and I didn't have to wear glasses before, or, or mobility issues and stairs not being my friend anymore, and like different things. So
yeah. Okay, cool. That's helpful.
I have to jump off because there's an issue and I need to jump on this other call, but
Okay.
thank you so very much. This has been so helpful. And if you can send that policy, that would be really good, because I would love for our policies to be more in alignment with what our values are, rather than just taking what the feds gave me and adopting that.
Yeah. Okay. And I'll do that after we finish.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank
Nicole.
you.
Nice to see you
Nice
and
to see you
Scout
too.
and Frankie.
Thanks. All right. Bye.
Bye. Okay, so can I are there like, do you guys have any other questions, or because I have what I need. I can also walk you through the next steps, Jolene.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to think about some like different things. And it's one of the challenges I think I've always had as like a TA provider is because people often ask, like, what is distinct or unique about rural spaces, or what is different about tribal? And so sometimes it's like very easy to pinpoint, but for the most part, it's like, it's a lot of the same things, just the way that it kind of comes out and the dynamics are slightly different.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm trying to think, like, when I'm here, like, what is really different, about, working in tribal or with Indigenous survivors when it comes to disabilities. And I think that some of those uniquenesses are just like more like amplified, right? But it's not different than what's happening in other like BIPOC communities, like how often like our disabilities were, used against us in so many ways, and how some of our disabilities are caused by the previous and current, colonization and our impacts to that, all of that kind of stuff. And so it's just kind of having me think about how things aren't, well, there is, beauty and uniqueness in, tribal communities that, for this, I think that it's just the general fact that our society sucks at actually supporting and recognizing people with disabilities. We've for too long pushed people to the side. And then now it's sometimes to the point where it's like, everyone's equal. And it's like, that's not what this means.
That's
Like,
not at all what this means.
so that's all I
Yeah.
was thinking about. So I don't have any like specific questions. I just have a lot of ponderings. And what I really like is that this is not what your intent of this ever was. This is not like, oh, you guys are now competent. You guys are now trained on how to do all the things. And for me, like, this is just starting that conversation and thinking about those little ways that we can incorporate things internally as an organization, externally, like in the work that we do, and really like, how can we be helping like communities and survivors on a day-to-day basis, right? So
yeah. And that's, I mean, it's just like when we were talking about like the conferences and stuff, like this is an effort to like give you a little bit of information and then connection to me. So that then if you want like to try to figure out like, okay, so how do we make like the sex trafficking conference, how do we know that's going to be accessible for everyone? Or for a majority of people. So, and then just reach out to me and then think about ways that, like I know with Deb and Stephanie, I was presenting some aspects like mental health and then people with disabilities generally to their TSASP grantees. But if there's like conferences that, I could even do like several different ones throughout like a track or something, like whatever like seems to work. I couldn't find the link to the statewide training or conference that you guys are doing in
Nicole
Hinckley.
said registration was open, but it's not. I just left it and didn't correct her, but it's not actually open yet. We just have a save the date out, but it's the 23rd to the 25th of April, just FYI, but registration is not actually open yet for any of our
conferences. Oh, good. I thought, why am I not being?
Yeah, that's why I was like, I should circle back, and then I didn't. And
no worries.
I've actually intentionally blocked it so you aren't allowed to see the thing.
Yeah, that's it.
The only one who can't register.
I can't register. I can't.
No, it's not open.
Not even a microaggression, it's full on just like
just aggression. But so, I mean, if it's helpful, I can do like a couple workshops that covers the information that we went over so that people kind of are more cognizant of people with disabilities and how to, provide accommodations. So, but yeah, anytime, anything that you're doing, if you want to help thinking through it, you can just reach out. We have a grant that pays for my time to do this, so it's perfect.
And all I can think about is how do we like work collectively to like shift cultural norms and understanding? Because that's that big part, right? Because it gets deprioritized, right? Because every day we have crisis after crisis after crisis. And how do we take that time to have the pause to really do the due diligence to set the framework? Because that will honestly make life so much easier. Like it'll make our programming so much easier, it'll make our budgeting so much easier. And that's not purpose of anything, right? But it does help, right?
Yeah.
And if we could think in advance, then.
Yeah. And the thing is this is a bad analogy, but I can't think of another one. You're building the plane while you're flying in it. So you can't often like look and like, oh, we could do this and this would make it much more accessible because you're busy. Yeah.
I'm chuckling because of like the whole, like we all talking about like flight anxiety and things like that. We're like,
I know.
falling apart.
I know. All right. Well, thanks, you guys. I'm good if you all are good. So I'll fill out the invoice for you all and I'll send it to you, Jolene, and you can let me know if that looks okay. And then I'll submit it.
Thank you so much for everything.
Yes.
I feel that lots of thinking. And we'll have lots of questions later on.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, everyone have a great day. Enjoy the sunshine. At least there's sunshine here where I am.
Thank you so much, Olga.
Yeah, my pleasure.